Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to the concession stand here on the KB Radio Network. I am your host, Kevin Reed, and this is the review of VHS 85, which was released Friday, October the 6th on Shudder. And look, I didn't even know this was coming out. I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about this movie coming out. But I'm a big fan of this franchise. This is the sixth installment in the VHS franchise. And if you're not familiar with the VHS franchise, it's a horror anthology film series. And I have a deep love for horror anthology films. This goes back to Creep Show 2, Tales from the Dark Side, the why am I blanking on it? The Twilight Zone, the movie, movies like that. And most recently, like Trick or Treat. I love anthology films. These little short films in a bigger movie. You put about 4 or 5 short films to make this big movie, and none of them really connect with one another. Sometimes they do, if it calls for it, and it can be interesting that way. But I love it when it's just its own separate thing and it's just in a movie together. And VHS came along. I think in it's been about 10 years, maybe 20. I don't know. The first VHS movie came out because a friend of mine is the one who introduced me to it, and he lent me his copy of VHS on DVD. And I was like, man, this is really good. And watched the second one and so on and so forth. I've just been a fan of this franchise. And Shudder, which is the streaming service, the past couple of years, they have released their own VHS films. I think last year was VHS 99, if I'm not mistaken. And this year we get VHS 84 or 85. I'm sorry. And it's set in 1985, and it's really enjoyable from a horror aspect of it all. But this was a deeply disturbing film. Now, all of these short films, which we have 5 different stories and 5 different directors, and all 5 of these stories or these segments in this film gave me the heebie-jeebies. This was a really good horror film. As I stated before, this film had a 5 segment story, but none of it connected. But you had a kind of a narrative story that went through the entire film. That was Total Copy, which was directed by David Buckner. And this was a kind of a made-for-TV documentary. And you remember those made-for-TV documentaries from the 80s? Those cheesy-looking, I guess you could say, what's the show? Unsolved Mysteries, with Robert Stack and all that. It looked like that. And that story was about this boy, this slime-covered boy, who was called Rory. And these scientists are, you know, trying to research or observe him or whatever the case. And all this boy is doing is sitting on a sofa watching TV, but he's covered in this goo or slime or whatever it was. I don't know what it was, but it was just weird. It was just out of the blue, which is common for this for these type of films. And it was a short little segment, and then we go into our next segment, which was No Wake, which was directed by Mike Nilsson. And this one was more along the lines of what I'm used to seeing in the VHS film franchise. A group of young kids, or young adults, I should say, because they look a little older than teenagers. So yeah, about young adults. And they're going on this lake to ski, to swim, and all this here. And all of a sudden, out the blue, you get you get a sniper, just started sniping people. I mean, just taking them out one by one. It was crazy, with all this going on, and you're getting it from the perspective of one of the people because he's holding the camera, and so it's weird, but it gets weirder because all of a sudden these kids or young adults wake up. One girl got to have her face shot off. Another dude got shot about 4 or 5 times. Even one of his appendices fell off, and not his arms or his legs. So you know where I'm going. Where I'm going there. And one dude got shot in the head, and his brains are hanging out, and all this here, and they're walking around, and you're like, "What's going on?" But they're not zombies, but they're. It was like they were just knocked out, or whatever the case may be. It was weird, and that was the basics. So they decide, okay, who shot us? We've got to find out who shot us, and that's how that segment ended. And you're like, oh, that stinks, that stinks. And we cut back to that total copy segment, and once again, the boy is still sitting on the sofa watching TV, and there's the goo, you know. So you have these scientists there, and they're researching the guy of the boy, and it was just weird, but it was just interweaving throughout this movie. And our next segment was God of Death. And this segment was directed by Gigi Saul Guerrero. And once again, complete misdirect. You think this is about an earthquake that took place in Mexico, and the survivors are trying to get to safety and all this here, but then you're quickly reminded that this is a horror film. So it's not just people fighting for survival. They go into this little cave, this Mayan cave, and discover the god of death. And all of a sudden, people start flipping out and ripping out hearts as sacrifice to this god of death who caused the earthquake and all this here. It is based around a true story. Not so much the god of death making people rip out other people's hearts and stuff, but there was an actual earthquake in Mexico City in 1985, and that was interesting that they actually uh used real world events for this little story, and so that was cool. Then we get another uh total copy segment, and it's the 1 month birthday of Rory, and the goo is growing and all this here. And so we go to another segment, which was the weirdest one. And I say that kind of loosely because they're all weird, but we get to the weirdest one that deals with technology and God in this little performance piece on the stage with this one woman show. And I'm sitting there watching this, and I'm like, where are we heading with this? And the woman is using VR, early VR from 1985, of course. And we get introduced to this techno god, and it's just weird. It's a weird one, but uh, it started to wrap up because it was moving kind of slow. I didn't know where this was going, but it did end strong. So it was an interesting little segment. Then we get another total copy segment, and this time Rory has grown tentacles. He got tentacles growing out of this little ooze, and it has spikes on the end of it. And so you're like, what's going on? Something ain't right here, because it was never right because he's covered in goo. Uh, and it keeps growing. And so we get to our other segment, which was a continuation from the first section, No Wake, with the young adults at the lake. This one is called Ambrosia, once again directed by Mike Nichols, and it's connected to that because we come to find out, well, I don't want to go in too much with it. I really haven't spoiled anything, but if I really go into this one, I'm going to spoil some things, and I don't want to spoil it for you. So just know this was probably one of my favorite ones. This is my second favorite segment in the movie, Ambrosia, and we get another total copy, and then we go into Dreamkill, which was directed by Scott Derrickson. If that name sounds familiar, Scott Derrickson directed The Black Phone last year. He directed Doctor Strange. He directed Sinister, uh, The Exorcism of Emily Rose. The dude is a horror master, in my humble opinion. And he directed this segment, which was really cool because it's about this videotape that's being mailed to the police department like a 3 days in advance of a murder that takes place, and or a week ahead or however long it is, and they come to find out that this is a dream that somebody is having, and they're trying to stop whatever they dreamt about from happening so that he mails it to the police department, and they find out who he is and this, that, and the third. It's a whole thing, and it's cool the way this plays out. I thought this was the best segment in the entire film. I really loved this segment. I could have watched a whole movie, a whole hour and a half to 2 hour movie about this segment, and that's how I judged these segments. Can I watch a whole full length film from these segments? And if I can, that's how I feel. These are good segments, and this makes it a good movie. I can see films, full length films, out of all of these, with the exception of the guide and the technology one. That one was kind of out of the box, but it was interesting. But we finally get the last total copy where we see Rory uh rise to his potentials, and I'll leave it at that. But overall, this was a really, really good addition to the VHS franchise. Really enjoyed it. Very unexpected, because I didn't know this was coming out. I caught it on a whim. I'm like, wait, is this a new one? And I went and checked it out, and boy, was I happy I did. VHS 85, now available on Shudder, gets a letter grade of a B plus. It's a B plus. Really good horror film, man. We done seen some really good horror movies this this year, and this just adds to it. Really, really good film. If you love the VHS franchise, you definitely gonna love VHS 85. Check it out. You will not be disappointed. I would like to know, do you plan to check it out, or have you checked it out, or have you seen any of the VHS films? I would like to know. Email the show, kbradiopodcast@gmail.com. You can also look me up on all social media platforms. Just look up the KB Radio Network. Look up the KB Radio Network channel on YouTube. Subscribe and like this video. Also, don't forget about the 5 stars, reviews, and sharing this show if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you are currently listening to the concession stand here on the KB Radio Network. Everybody, thank you for joining me for this review of VHS 85, currently streaming on Shudder. Can't wait to speak to you again later on down the line. Want you all to know that I love you. Continue to love everyone. And until we speak again, you all be blessed.